Today we turn inward towards the geometries of spirit, the sacred diagrams through which consciousness calls down the divine into matter. We take heedance from our elders, especially Albert Churchward, who reminds us that the earliest initiates encoded their knowledge in sign language and symbols, in gesture and form, not for concealment, but for and because only the awakened could see and evolve the species to a higher self, to a higher phase. And as Manly P. Hall so often warned, the outer forms of religion are but shadows, similar to Plato's allegory of the cave, which are echoes of a deeper, more radiant order. The magic circle is one such echo. It is not a superstition, it is a technique of the soul and spirit. A liminal boundary where the aspirant may stand between worlds, between the mortal and the divine, protected by the mathematics of truth. Tonight, we trace the outlines of the original temple, drawn not in stone, but in ether. Welcome to Beyond the Forbidden Veil. This is episode 2.2, Pure Forms and Magic Circles. It's very good to be back here with you guys again. I'm very excited to put out this work again. I have been looking forward to getting this episode on the table for quite some time now. I've had a lot of amazing things going on in my life, which has prevented me from being able to put out this work. One example, I now am a father of a beautiful boy who was born January 8th. His name is Rowan Artorius Martin. It is spelled Artorius, but there is a little occulted symbolism in his middle name. For Artorius is a Latinized version of Arthur, and so I wanted to add that secret H in there, so it's pronounced Artorius. But other than that, my life has been going very well, and I've just been extremely busy working on family projects and house projects, and mainly just been family oriented. So I apologize for not getting the work out sooner, but all in due time. So today I'm really pumped to talk about this amazing topic, which is pure forms. And then we're going to get into the circle dot. And for anybody who's been following the cubby hole, you should already be aware of some of these concepts. And if you are not aware of the cubby hole, I highly recommend going and checking out Nate Cap's most recent episodes, but all of his work has been amazing. I was a co-host on this podcast for a while, and he has just taken the reins and really, really done some amazing work out there. So make sure to go and support Nate Cap's amazing work. You can find his work at cubbyhole.com. That's CUBBYWHOLE.com. You can also find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all kinds of other platforms. So make sure to go and support that. This work is a complement to what him and Douglas Martin puts out. And this tends to be a place where a lot of people tend to lack an in-depth understanding because they don't truly understand the expressions of the ancients. And people get far more into materialism and utility and overlook the importance of the initial expressions of consciousness, and you really have to take your mind out of the current place of perception for modern thinking and put yourself back into an ancient's mind, into an elder's mind, and understand that what's being preserved here is a science of the spirit. It is a science not only of natural law, but it is a science to reveal and help you harmonize with the cosmic laws and within yourself, to gain true purpose, to gain true meaning, to get out of neglect, to get out of apathy, to get out of self-loathing, to raise yourself into a truly enlightened being. And to me, the bar for enlightenment should be set with understanding the Egyptian sign language, specifically in pure forms. And most people have never even heard of this. Some people may have heard about Platonic forms, and we will talk about that today at some point. So without further ado, let's get into some of the content. So one of my favorite authors, Albert Churchward, in his book, The Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, I recommend reading any of his work. And once you read one of his books, you're going to want all 7 of his books. I have all 7 on this bookshelf back here, including some originals, which I'm still looking for a few more of the originals and can't wait to get a hold of them. But he goes on to say, in reference to symbols and pure forms, in tracing the origins of symbols, we find that they were pure forms originally, derived from nature and the natural world around them. So this is crucial to understand. I felt that this would be a great place to start, because when we're talking about symbolism, right, that's what all these episodes have been about, we need to get to the root, the causal cause of the geometry of symbolism. And when we think of form, right, we usually think of it in a physical idea. So I wanted to define pure forms. Pure forms represent the highest reality and ultimate truths, accessible through intellectual and intuitive means. Anthropologically, they manifest in symbols, rituals, and myths of human societies, illustrating our collective journey towards enlightenment and our connection to the source. This synthesis reveals pure forms as timeless and universal, bridging the gap between the material and the spiritual. A pure form is a blueprint similar to an archetype, as I described before, of a truth that has not been altered by dogma. So that last line there is very crucial to hold on to as we work further into this type of material. A pure form is a blueprint of a truth that has not been altered by dogma. That is crucial. So we're trying to get to the fundamental truth. And to get to that, we have to understand pure forms. All of this information is going to help you to make use of the way the ancients expressed the sciences, which were preserved in many different forms, whether that be through astrotheology, which will be something we cover on the next episode, the mythology, the eschatology, which we also will be getting deep into that eventually, just through oral traditions, even through movies nowadays, obviously. And as these forms start to become more complex, it becomes more difficult as a modern conscious individual to understand the essence of that form. So really what we're doing here is we're doing a process of alchemy. And I know we haven't, delved deep into alchemy yet, but I'm sure some of you who are interested in this have some semblance of understanding of alchemy. So the idea here is that we're dissolving away all the impurities and getting back to something that is more pure, the essence of that thing, right? Pure forms originate from the concept of primordial unity, the undivided wholeness. This unity is often symbolized by the circle, an emblem of eternity and the infinite. It represents the undifferentiated source from which all existence flows. And you can also correlate this same definition to the dot as well, that it is the point which all things start to emerge out of. But we have to understand that the circle and the dot are actually one and the same. And that's something that I will start to explain more as we get further in the episode. Pure forms are ideal archetypes existing in a metaphysical realm. For instance, the form of beauty is perfect and unchanging, unlike its imperfect representations in the physical world. Now, this gets into a little bit of philosophy, similar to what Plato would talk about. This suggests that pure forms are the ultimate reality, the blueprints of existence from source. In studying pure forms, we trace our ancestors' understanding of the universe and their spiritual concepts. These forms are not mere decorations, but are profound symbols representing the eternal truths and natural laws that govern existence. They are the distilled essence of ancient wisdom preserved through the ages, serving as a key to unlocking the mysteries of life and the cosmos. Pure forms are not merely aesthetic shapes or ancient symbols. They are primordial archetypes, forms that predate language and the evolution and formation of culture and all synthetic constructs of control we now call religion. These forms emerge out of totemic awareness of early man and his relationship with nature, not as a superstition, but as an experiential connection to the cosmos and its eternal laws. In the totemic phase of culture, mythos was not dogma, it was direct gnosis, a way to encode natural law through symbol and form. Mythos, in its original function, bridged epistemology and experience. It was not belief, it was true knowing. But over time, due to a multitude of factors, the priestcraft neglected the pure forms in favor of more materialistic and complex forms. These forms and more complex forms became extremely powerful political devices to be used for control. To reconcile the balkanization of epistemology today, we now know what we know and what we have to do. We must return these pure forms, especially in regards to the understanding of the essence of the pure forms. We must tear away the veil of false religions, which serve only to dominate and divide, and remember the original language of nature. The ancients understood the encoding of wisdom into form because it does not lie. Circles, spirals, triangles, the dot within the circle. These are not just symbols. They are the grammar of the universe. They are the memory of truth, still embedded in stone, still beating within our very DNA, but primarily within the fundamental aspects of our own consciousness. Reclaiming these forms is not in any way about another false belief system or religious control system. It is in fact the way that we dismantle the dogma of these control systems. It is about unshackling our minds from externally imposed dogmatic belief systems and returning to the direct living interface with consciousness and natural law. The evolution from totem to temple to tyranny can only be reversed by going back to the source, where mythos was true medicine for consciousness, where symbols were science of nature. Not only do we need to look back to the ancients, but we must look within ourselves to find these answers. For human beings are a symbol, and within the human flesh, deep, dormant in the collective consciousness, a connection to the spirit, you will find a pure form, which all things unfold from. Albert Churchward goes on to say in the same book, The Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, the pure form, which is the basis of all the ancient symbols, was not merely a geometrical figure. It was a sign of spiritual truth, designed to express that which is hidden in nature, the divinity of the cosmos, and the unity of creation. So you see, the pure form is not just a physical representation. So whenever we're talking about pure forms, a lot of people think form, so they think immediately geometry, right? Well, that's a representation. of something that is more metaphysical. It's something that's more conceptual, but also spiritual, that has to do with the nature of reality itself. Now, when most people hear the word form, they're probably going to think of it in the aspect of the 7 elements of art, which at least most of us probably learned in schools. So you have line, then you have shape, which is a 2D aspect. And then from shape, you create a 3-dimensional object, which is form. Then they have space, texture, value, and color, which also is pretty interesting because this correlates to the 7 liberal arts as well and the 7 hermetic principles, but that's a whole nother thing. The important part here is to distinguish when I am using the word form. I'm speaking more in a metaphysical concept rather than an artistic concept. It's easy to misunderstand what I'm talking about because our brains process this word and we think materialistically. But just to be clear, it is not separate from the materialistic forms. It is important to understand that the first forms also are crucial to the evolution of the mythos. But when we're talking about pure forms, I feel it is important to distinguish that from the artistic form of 3-dimensional objects. And that is 3-dimensional objects in the physical plane of existence. See, we are capable of forming all of these aspects in the mind without them being in the physical. So these could also be called a non-physical form, which refers to entities or concepts that exist outside of the realm of physicality and specifically are not comprised of matter. And I've already given some examples and will later, but some examples would be like mathematical objects, concepts such as justice, beauty. These concepts exist in this realm of platonic forms or pure forms. But we have to recognize the limitation in the philosophical explanation of the non-physical versus the physical, because one is the causal cause and the other is the effects. Okay, so one is the causation of the physicality. So these two things are completely intimately related to each other. And the physicality is a tracing board back to the metaphysical or non-physical. So these are not completely separate from each other. So for example, the concept of a shape is formed in the mind and then is manifested into reality through an artistic medium. But it is also crucial to understand that in the monad mind, there are firewalls or buffering systems set up for consciousness, specifically the monad consciousness, to not manifest everything just instantaneously, magically, through thinking about it or feeling it. Okay? There are such things as delusions and illusions and things that are an impossibility to manifest in the physicality because they cannot meet the requirements that are set by natural laws for those things to manifest. So just because you think about a, pink elephant in your house doesn't mean it's going to manifest into a formation into your house instantaneously. And it's important to distinguish what things meet those requirements and how we can utilize this law of mentalism to create a better world or create better experiences, arts, music, etc., compared to the completely out of bounds and run amok imagination. So a lot of people, I've actually debated many people online and some philosophers about this, specifically online, but in person as well. But where they think of these things merely as a materialistic endeavor And that's part of the issue. We have to get out of this idea that it's solely a materialistic endeavor or a materialistic representation, that we have to get back to the understanding of the causal cause, which is of mentalism, which is part of the first Hermetic principle. And pure forms is a very advanced topic. So this is something that was hard for me to bring to the table so early for this series, but I felt that it was necessary to really build upon a foundation that's going to help us understand the Egyptian sign language once we get into true Freemasonry, once we start to cover the esoteric traditions and the mystery schools. The understanding of pure forms can be traced back to the earliest human societies where they were used in rituals, art, and architecture. For example, the use of circles and spirals in prehistoric cave paintings reflects humanity's early attempt to understand and communicate with the spiritual world. These forms are timeless and universal, embodying the essence of spiritual truths and the evolution of human consciousness across cultures and epochs. As I have up on the screen here, McKee Springs Dinosaur National Monument in Utah. This is a Native American cave painting, rock painting, and as you can see, there is a spiral on this, and we are going to go into spiral symbolism, and it's very, very crucial to understand this. But first, we're going to, like I said, understand the building blocks before we can get into a more advanced form, which is a spiral. So let's take a look at how we can categorize this. Mental forms: ideational, non-material, spiritual, and metaphysical. These are all semantical words, okay? Usually explaining the same thing. Metaphysical is a philosophical term. Spiritual is more, it is a philosophical term as well, but it kind of cuts through all the intellectual left brain stuff. Non-material. Well, what do we mean by that? We're really just talking about the immaterial, which is the unseen. It's the unseen, occulted part of reality. It's spiritual. And ideational, right? That is ideas. Ideas are a non-physical component of consciousness. And in fact, the word idea means an archetype from the mind of God, or you could say the nature of reality, a channeling from nature itself. These are immaterial constructs, the architecture of thoughts, symbols, archetype, intention, and will. They exist in the mental plane, preceding and often shaping the physical reality. A lot of things here that go along with this. We have Platonic ideas or forms. We have dreams and visions. We have beliefs and desires. We have archetypes, such as Jungian and mythological, and in fact, eschatological. Okay, that's a hard word to pronounce. I had to think about that one, which is eschatology. And then mathematical truths, intentions and thoughts. And then rituals, which we covered rituals very, very thoroughly, as they are crafted in the mind and spirit first. So rituals are not just a physical pattern, but also there are mental rituals that go on. Okay, so that's really important to conceptualize, is how we do have these mental rituals going on and these mental rites that we pass, and emotional ones, thoughts and emotions. From the occult perspective, mental forms are often seen as the blueprint or the causative matrix behind all manifestation. As above, so below. What occurs in the mind above echoes in the material below. So a lot of people who are familiar with Hermeticism will understand this as not only cause and effect, but also mentalism, law of correspondence, rhythm, etc., etc. Physical forms are corporeal. They are material and they are physical, as opposed to the spiritual, the immaterial, and the metaphysical. These both are working in conjunction with each other in reality. It is the yin and yang. It is the masculine and the feminine. These are not polar opposites, but they are mirrors of the same thing. But it is important to understand that one is a causation and one is an effect. So these are the manifested expressions, being the effect. Concrete shapes, bodies, and objects that exist in the space-time continuum. Your body, nature, tools, buildings, symbols, physically drawn or constructed, ritual implements, statues, temples, talismans, corporeal behavior, and ritual action. So the occult perspective of this is physical forms are vessels or vehicles for higher principles. They are shaped by the mental, spiritual, and energetic realms. Physical rituals and symbols only have power when ensoldened by mental intentions and spiritual force. We see this a lot in ritual. We covered that in the episode about rituals, about mental intention. It's very important for focus. You're going to be hearing a lot from Albert Churchward. This is from his book, The Arcana of Freemasonry. The pure form is the fundamental basis upon which all sacred geometry is built. It represents the archetypal essence of the universe, the unchanging principles that govern creation. It is through understanding these pure forms that one begins to perceive the order of the cosmos and the divine order. So when we start to unravel this, we'll start to see that there is an inherent force of creation behind everything. And we'll show a few examples of more complex forms in nature where we can extrapolate upon this, that there must be a creative force behind this. He also goes on to say in his book, The Origins and Evolution of the Human Race, understanding the pure forms of ancient symbols allows us to trace the development of human thought and religious beliefs through all ages. So this is going to help break the dogmatic cycle when it comes to studying all the religions of the world. Specifically the three main iterations, which is Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, which are all Abrahamic religions. So this will help you to cut through all the dogma. Now, it's important to understand that you should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Religion is a vital, vital part of the human expression and human experience. Now, institutionalized religion is something different, and the dogmatic religion is also part of the dangers. But we're trying to cut through all that and understand the purest forms within the religion, such as the esoteric and occult teachings that are preserved within the religious text, within the religious rituals, within the religious symbolism. So we don't want to throw that out because then it cuts us off from our origins. We need these things to trace back our origins. And we're not getting out of this problem that we have currently, which is human slavery and ultimately socialism, until we trace our origins. There's just no doubt about it. We're not going to be able to get out of this mess at all. And hopefully we'll be able to explain more of that in the future. Again, Albert Churchward, The Origins and Evolution of Freemasonry. The pure forms found in ancient Egyptian symbolism and religious practices have influenced many subsequent civilizations, leaving an undeniable mark on their spiritual and cultural development. So you're going to find this, like I'm saying, in every single civilization. You go to Tibet, you're going to find it there. You go to Japan, you're going to find it there. You're going to find these marks, which are in fact going to be ubiquitous with these early hero cults, which we will explain in the next episode. So like I said, I'm not trying to put the cart before the horse because we need to understand pure forms to understand some of the things that are coming later. But at the same time, to understand pure forms, you have to understand some of the things that are coming later, right? So, just bear with me and stay oriented because this will start to piece together. And it was difficult, as I said before, to figure out if I wanted to put pure forms here, which should be the foundation because it is about the essence and the first thing, the first principles, or after, so it was kind of difficult. So you may want to come back to this after we go through a few more episodes and re-listen, and it may reveal more for you. In fact, I always suggest to any student and any teacher, any initiate, to re-listen and go back over the work over and over and over, because these things are a full lifetime of study. And I'm only here to show you the path, to show you the sources, to give you some of the basics of the ideologies and the concepts. I'm not here to give you all the answers. I can't. We're still studying this together, and we need more people on this path as Knights of the Round Table to really get to that center truth and apply our skills and merit so that we can help alleviate unnecessary suffering in the world. Now that we've looked at pure forms, we need to understand complex forms. Complex forms is the unfoldment from the essence of the pure form. So as a visual example of this, let's just start with the dot, and then it unfolds into the circle as it starts to expand. And then you can take it a next step forward. There's many different pathways you can take with the unfoldment, but this is just a visual representation of one pathway. So then you have the unfoldment of the circle, which then can unfold into the vesica Pisces. Okay. And then it continues to unfold into the seed of life and then into the flower of life and death. Yes, it is the flower of life and death. A lot of people take contention with this symbol, saying that it's not an organic symbol, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to show something here that a lot of people don't fully recognize because they want to go to the more complex form of this. So in this graft, if we take the seed of life, then we rotate it 2 times, it becomes this spiraling seed of life. And if you rotate it 8 times, it starts to take on this torus field look. And if you take that 2D image and then you 3D model it, it becomes a vortice and a torus field, which we find that the electrical magnetic field of all things have this torus field on them. And it is that circle dot in a 3-dimensional form combined with a spiral, combined with a vortice. So this is extremely important to understand because there's another symbol which comes from this, which is the torus. It's also called the flower of life. And it is a more complex form than the one that I showed, which was the more colloquial and more widespread and actually more ancient symbol. So the original flower of life, which is carved in temples all over the world, that you find on floors and temples all over the world, not just, in modern day, very, very ancient, is actually a less complex form than this vortice or this torus field. So in the modern day, there is this dichotomy between these 2 symbols, one known as the quote-unquote true lotus or true flower of life versus the more ancient and simplistic form of the flower of life. They both are actually correct. And this is what people are getting wrong. They have created a false dialectic between the symbols without understanding the way the ancients were preserving their sciences within these forms. It is important to note here that the oldest known depiction of the original flower of life comes from the temple of Osiris at Abydos. And we will be exploring the Osiris mythos as we get into later episodes in this series. But just as a little bit of advance foreshadowing, you could say, this is the flower of life and death, and it is preserving the cycles, not only of the seasons, but also of the great year, which I'll be explaining in the next episode. So just throwing that out there. But it is a connection directly back to the ancient stellar myth, being preserved through the lunar and into the solar, and specifically comes down to us through the cult of Osiris. And so when people call this the daisy of death, they're not too far off. They're just missing the other half of the picture. And this has to do with the mingling of the eschatology and the mythology. Another part of the contention here is that this comes from a Metatronic formula, and this character Metatron tends to be a very controversial character who most likely was originally Hermes Trismegistus, or originally Thoth in the Egyptian tradition, and then there's older versions of him. And so people are taking this symbol and they're dogmatizing it without understanding how the ancients were preserving this esoteric science, and they're not understanding pure forms, let alone understanding the complex forms that are coming after as the mythos is advancing and evolving. As the unfoldment of pure forms takes place, it constitutes the prospect for more complex forms. And when we lack the knowledge of pure forms, they become vestigial, neglected, and stagnated. The remembering, right, to bring back together, to bring the members back together, and the restoring, to restore, to put the knowledge back in the store where it needs to go, of pure forms is a solution to dissipate the pan-ignorance. And what I mean by pan-ignorance is the widespread ignorance that's going on in the world. But if we take a look at this simple diagram above, you can take a simple idea of a pamphlet that has been folded, and then you unfold this pamphlet and it becomes more complex. And another example of this could be origami, right? You take a simple piece of paper and you fold this piece of paper, and then you create these very complex forms with a simple square or rectangle or even circle, et cetera, et cetera. But then afterwards, imagine this. Imagine taking this origami and unfolding it. Let's stay oriented here. When we are folding the square, metaphorically, it is an unfoldment of richness and knowledge. So this is what we mean by the unfoldment of this symbol, right? Like taking a simple circle and it unfolds into something more complex. But when we look at it physically in this diagram, we are folding it and it becomes more complex. And then imagine going back into trying to refold the refoldment, to refold this origami based upon just what is left there, just the lines. And you're reverse engineering it. And this is the process, the folding or foldment, then the unfoldment, and then the refoldment. And that goes the same for something like a map or a pamphlet, where if you happen to not fold it correctly, it actually can lose its original form. And this is very important to understand when we're tracing back pure forms, that when we're talking about complex forms, and then we try to get back to pure forms, if we don't have a direction, an orientation, we end up refolding it improperly, and then it loses its original meaning and becomes something completely different. So Plato goes on to say, the forms are the causes of all our knowledge. They are the perfect models which embody the essence of the various properties and qualities of material things. So as you can see here, he doesn't use the term pure forms as Albert Churchward does, but if you listen to what he says here, the forms are the causes of all our knowledge. They are the perfect models which embody the essence of various properties and qualities of material things. As you can see, this is the same thing. He's talking about the same thing. And one of the issues here is that not only the Romans, but also the Greeks really didn't understand the Egyptian Sign Language. And that's what we're trying to resolve. We're trying to remember. We're trying to reconnect our origins. And we're trying to understand our heritage and the elders' ways of preserving an ancient knowledge, an ancient science of spirituality. So Platonic forms. What are Platonic forms, right? I'm sure a lot of us maybe have ran into this, maybe not. Maybe some of us don't really understand this. So the point with me bringing this to the table is that whenever you say pure forms, most likely people are going to think of Platonic forms. So we're going to talk about how they're similar, but they're explained differently. In philosophy, particularly in metaphysics, the theory of forms, also known as the theory of ideas, Platonic idealism or Platonic realism, is widely attributed to the Greek philosopher Plato. This theory posits that the physical world is not as real or true as the forms. These forms, typically capitalized and often translated as ideas, are the non-physical, eternal, absolute, and unchanging or immutable essences of all things, of which the objects and matter in the physical world are merely imperfect copies. Plato presents these concepts through the characters in his dialogue, primarily Socrates, who often imply that these forms are the only objects of study capable of yielding true knowledge. So again, we see this ubiquitous nature about this metaphysical concept of perfect forms, these perfect archetypes that when we extrapolate from these, we gain real knowledge, we gain truth. We understand ourselves better. We understand the physical world better. Although I disagree and contend with this idea that the physical world is not a real thing. I think this is another imbalance that takes place. And this is the problem here, is that whenever we're separating the physical and the spiritual, we now have a dichotomy between one and the other. And really, in reality and in truth, it's a balance. You know, the spiritual world is here and now. You are in it. You are existing in it. It's just that the way that they work and the way they're conceptualized is in this dualistic form. So it all can't be seen as a singular thing at this level. For example, if you only had one color, that kind of makes painting really limited. Now, you can do some awesome stuff with it, but it's really nice to have the diversity of multiple colors, right? So this world is filled with diversity of expressions of the one great spirit. So also within this, some may confuse Platonic forms for Platonic solids, though they are connected to each other. They're not quite the same. They are at the essence the same, but the way that they're explained philosophically is not. So here's an example of Platonic solids. You have the 5 solids, which are correlated to the 5 elements, the 5 alchemical elements specifically. So you have tetrahedron, which is fire. It has 4 faces, 4 points, and 6 edges. It has 60-degree angles. It has 180-degree angles by 4. And then it also has 720 degrees. And then you have the octahedron, which is correlated to the element of air. It has 8 faces, 6 points, and 12 edges. It also has 60-degree angles and 180 degrees by 8, and then 1440 degrees. You have the hexahedron, which is Earth. It has 6 faces, 8 points, 12 edges. This one has 90-degree angles, and it has 360 degree by 6, and then it has 260 degrees, or 2160 degrees, correction. And then you have the isohedron, which is correlated to water. It has 20 faces, 12 points, 30 edges. It has, again, a 60-degree angle at its corners. It has 180 by 20, and then you have 3,600 degrees within this. And then you have the dodecahedron, which is correlated to the 5th element, which is aether or ether. It has 12 faces, 20 points, 30 edges. It has at its corners 108 degrees. And that number, all these numbers are very significant, by the way, esoterically. So for the advanced student, they probably are catching on a little bit. But that 108 is the commencement and recommencement of a cycle. But all of them are extremely important, especially if you went through the cubbyhole. You should understand some of these things. And then it has 540 by 12, so 540 degrees by 12. And then it, is totaled in 6,480 degrees. So these are the Platonic solids, and these represent to Plato the most pure and perfect forms. These forms were not Greek inventions. In the Edfu temple text, the primordial island of flame is described as being measured and built by the divine architects using the geometry of nature. The Jed pillar, the Bin stone, and the Ankh all encode ratios and angles found in these solids. The ancient Egyptians understood form not as abstraction, but as emanations, the outpouring of spirit into the material. And these forms were sacred letters of the earliest mystery schools passed down from pre-dynastic ages to safeguard cosmic truth. Pythagoras also is attributed to saying number is the ruler of forms and ideas. In the Pythagorean schools, which were passing down the ancient knowledge of the elders from Egypt, these polyhedral archetypes were taught widely, reflecting the ancient mathematical knowledge inherited from the priesthood of ancient Egypt. Pythagoras of Samos, though it is historically obscure, he has been credited by ancient sources such as Iamblichus and Proclus with integrating mathematical and mystical inquiry into his curriculum. He studied under the ancient mystery schools, specifically in Thebes and Heliopolis. Pythagoras emphasized on number as the root of form and is echoed in the doctrine of tetractys, a symbolic arrangement of numbers 1 through 4 forming a triangle, which was seen to represent the harmony of the cosmos. Within this framework, geometric forms were not abstractions but manifestations of archetypal principles. While the Greek mathematical tradition is often credited with systemizing geometry, the Egyptians were among its original practitioners, employing it in both practical and symbolic applications. Texts such as the Rhine Mathematical Papyrus show advanced understanding of geometry as early as 1800 BC, but more relevant are the symbolic geometries encoded in the architecture and cosmology. Sacred geometry among the earliest civilizations was not just decorative, but ritualistic and initiatory, a visual language encoding cosmological principles. The Platonic solids are more than mathematical curiosities, they are ontological statements. In the Egyptian and Pythagorean traditions alike, geometry is the architecture of spirit, the scaffold upon which matter crystallizes and consciousness ascends. As Manly P. Hall once wrote, geometry is frozen music, and music is geometry made audible. The study of these forms, then, is not merely an intellectual pursuit. It is an act of philosophical remembrance, a re-engagement with the primordial language through which the cosmos first spoke itself into being. So we're going to move into the next section, and this is the circled dot. This is probably one of the most powerful symbols, and in fact, throughout all time immemorial, it is considered to be the most perfect symbol of all time. The circle is seen to be perfection in general. It is an endless curve where there really is no beginning and end. It is timeless. It is eternal. So beyond its ritualistic significance, the circle dot is one of the most ancient symbols of man. It holds a deeper metaphysical meaning, one that transcends the bounds of time and space. It is a symbol of the eternal cycles of creation and destruction, the circle of life, of the infinite dance of life and death. It is seen as a symbol for the divine and perfection. Within its sacred circumference, the polarities of existence merge into a unified whole, mirroring the cosmic symphony of the universe itself. In fact, it is a symbol for the universe. It is a symbol for the self. It is a symbol for natural law. It is a symbol for all things, in fact, because it is about wholeness. It is about holistic. And everything, really, you can fit almost everything you need to in this circle. Everything that you ever needed to learn about life is within the circle, or it is the circle itself. The dot itself represents the fixed point, the emergent property. So the circle, the boundary, could be seen as a sacred feminine, and the fixed point within the center is the self, or the emergent property of the sacred masculine. We often see this symbol being used as a symbol for the sun, but it's more than that, and we will display how it's more than that. And I will display how it's far deeper than just a symbol for the sun, but it's crucial to understand why it's connected to the sun and the soul and the journey of the self. You could study this symbol your entire life and probably only pull out a fraction of its true meaning. So this is from a famous occultist, Cornelius Agrippa, and he states, "A circle is the first, simplest, and most perfect of all figures. It is the measure of all other figures, containing as much as is within it, and being bounded by one line without beginning or end, as is God, the first and most perfect work." This comes from his 3 books of occult philosophy, book 2, chapter 23. I have this book and I've thoroughly read it. And it is an amazing book. It is amazing work of occult literature. And I highly recommend anybody to study his work into occultism. And as one of my favorite authors, who you're going to continue to see a pattern here between Manly P. Hall and Albert Churchward. Manly P. Hall, from his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, in the chapter Ancient Mystery, he says, "The circle is the emblem of eternity, for it has neither beginning nor end. It is the symbol of completeness and unity, of protection and divine enclosure. It signifies the perfected soul, free from all external corruption, standing within the sacred boundary of cosmic law. So the circle represents a boundary, and it represents natural law, cosmic law, God's law, karma, however you want to look at any of this stuff. All those words that we use, really, it's just law. That's all it really is. Natural law, it's just law. That's it. It's capital L law, okay? Which is an immutable binding condition in reality. That's it. And people don't get that. We categorize it in different semantical words. We like to add color to these things, and sometimes it adds clarity and sometimes it adds ambiguity, and we just have to be careful about that. But all it really is the law. That's it. Not man-made law, not anything else. It's just the law. So with this circle dot symbolism, we have the axis and the center. And this is what I call spirit and matter, where spirit meets matter. The dot is fixed. It is immutable. It does not move. It is the unmoved mover, the absolute. The circle revolves. It expresses time, space, and manifestation. So the dot represents being, the I, in fact, the ego as well, the self. The circle represents becoming. The dot is the spirit, the eternal witness, the eternal observer, consciousness. The circle is the soul in motion, in learning, and in return. The circle carries the mystery of the 360 degrees. This number was not chosen arbitrarily. It was discovered in nature. 360 is a whole. And this is very important to understand, because not only is there puns in there, a little bit of green language, a whole, as in a whole in something, but it's also about completion, right? So simultaneously, it could represent two different polar aspects, completion or emptiness. Because if you have a hole in yourself, people try to fill it. It's also called a void. So when we have a great sense of self-loathing and in conjunction, an immense amount of apathy, we are empty within ourselves. But on the flip side, we have this idea of being whole, becoming whole again, because we have been fractured, because our holistic self has been shattered and fragmented into pieces, and we are a detritus of what we used to be. And we don't remember who we truly are, or we don't know who we truly are, or we don't understand who we truly are. And this goes with the what as well, what we truly are, which is spirit in the flesh. So to become whole is to understand this circle dot symbolism. So I find it interesting that we have this polysemantic word that is phonetically related with one, a negative aspect of our psychology, and another, a positive aspect. And this is a sacred cycle, this symbol. It divides harmoniously by nearly every major number, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 12, etc. It is the number of completion, the cosmic rhythm of time's great wheel. If we reduce it in gematria, we have 3 plus 6 plus 0 equals 9. Now this number 9 is used in the occult mystery traditions, especially the dark occult traditions, because of how it multiplies and how it goes through addition. But there's a positive context to the number 9. These are not unilaterally one way or another. They are neutral symbols and neutral mathematics. The number of return, the spiral folded back into itself, the 9 is both the summit and the echo. It folds all numbers back into itself. Any number times by 9 eventually adds back to 9. You come back to what you have added into it. So, 9 plus 1 is 10, and then 1 plus 0 is 1. So you come back to that. If you do 9 times 2, you have 18, and then 1 plus 8 equals 9. So you always come back to these same things. There was a 360-day calendar that existed. These extra 5 days are known as the epigomenal days. They were mythologically associated to many different zoo types and deities over the years, but specifically arising in the late solar phase. This is something that we will unravel as we move forward. But if you'd like to speedline your studies into this, I highly recommend just going to the cubbyhole, where Nate Cap really explains this in detail. The zodiac is divided into 12 signs of 30 degrees each. This equals 360 degrees, marking the celestial influence and the completion, the perfect circle, right? There's even the band, Perfect Circle, right? An amazing band. The Vedic Wheel of Time, the Dindara zodiac, and the Mayan Zolkin, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, all encode 360 as a divine measurement. So this 360 is extremely important, and we will be exploring it more when we look at the Arthurian legend later on, in correlation to the Knights of the Round Table. Within occultism, there's this idea of squaring the circle, specifically in alchemy. Squaring the circle refers to a geometrical problem of constructing a square with the same area as a given circle using only a compass and a straight edge, which has been proven impossible materialistically. The impossibility stems from the fact that the mathematical constant of pi, which is essential for calculating the area of a circle, is transcendental. This means it cannot be a solution to any polynomial equation with rational coefficients, and therefore cannot be constructed using only a compass and a straight edge. Both the compass and straight edge is a Masonic tool, and it's very extremely esoteric. So what they're saying here is that it's a paradox, the idea of squaring a circle. And we have Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man here on the right, which shows the idea of squaring the circle. And you have the sacred masculine and sacred feminine, plus you have the symbols of the sacred masculine and feminine. Not only are the circle and square, but also the upward triangle and the inverted triangle. And that has profound meaning in it when you start to reveal what these symbols actually are standing for, which is ultimately understanding the self. Among many sacred emblems transmitted through secret schools of antiquity, the mystery schools, few have endured with the silent eloquence of the squared circle, that most profound hieroglyph of spiritual reconciliation. To the uninitiated, it appears merely as a geometric riddle. To the illuminated, it is the very key of the great work, the magnum opus. This ancient emblem was carved into the stones of Gothic cathedrals, encoded into the proportions of Egyptian sanctuaries, and whispered among the adepts of the Rosy Cross. The square and the circle come together signifies the perfected soul, the philosopher's stone, wherein spirit is made flesh and flesh redeemed by spirit. To square the circle is to become whole. It is to walk the middle path between chaos and order, to know the laws of both stars and stone. And really what it is to know the laws of the universe and the self. It is to rise in consciousness until the outer angles of the world dissolves into a radiant curve of the one. Thus, the sage who squares the circle does not conquer nature. He communes with her. He does not enslave the elements. He aligns himself with their secret harmonies, and in doing so, he finds within himself that which neither dies nor is born, but simply is, simply that which is. And this is a famous depiction of the alchemical process of creating the Philosopher's Stone, which we will be talking about later. So this is a statement from Eliphas Levi, who wrote very deeply on occultism. He actually is the originator of the current symbol of Baphomet, which we will explore in later episodes deeply, and it's definitely not what most people think it is. So this comes from his book Transcendental Magic. To find the philosophical stone is to square the circle. And this comes from Fulcanelli, which I spoke about this individual when it comes to green language in my earlier presentation, The Occult Meaning of Words, Green Language. And hopefully we will be able to explain some more of that and dive into that eventually. But his name is very encoded itself. So if you want to know some of that, go back to my presentation, The Occult Meaning of Words. He says the solution to the great work is hidden in the squaring of the circle. And this comes from his book, The Mystery of the Cathedrals. And then Manly P. Hall, from The Secret Teachings of All Ages, he says, the square is the symbol of the body, the house of the soul. The circle is the symbol of spirit, that which was, is, and shall be. He who can square the circle has found the key to eternity. So in all occult traditions and all esoteric traditions, we find this idea of the magic circle. So to understand this, as you can see, we're trying to build upon the foundations. You got a brief understanding, a very rudimentary understanding of pure forms. Now we went into circle, circle dot, and now we're moving into magic circles. In the esoteric traditions of the East, the magic circle finds expression in the mandala as a sacred geometrical form that serves as a microcosmos of the universe and a portal to the divine. Within its intricate patterns lie the secrets of creation and the keys to enlightenment, beckoning the seeker to embark upon the inner journey of self-discovery. In the Western occult traditions, the magic circle takes a more tangible form, serving as a consecrated space for ritual invocation and ceremonial magic. Actually, they're both really doing the same thing. It's just this is how we define these things. They're not really any different. Within its confines, the practitioner harnesses the elemental forces of nature, aka elemental powers, in hope to gain insight into esoteric knowledge and spiritual illumination, or in fact to recommune with the one great spirit, recommune with source, and to channel a higher form, a higher ideals, or a higher form, or higher ideals, or higher ideas from causation, and to get in touch really with elemental powers and pure forms. So in the West and in the East, you have both people practicing these rituals of magic circles. Throughout the long twilight of prehistory, when the temples of wisdom were yet without walls, and nature whispered its mysteries through the rustling leaves and the flickering of flame, there arose a symbol so perfect in form, so complete in its implication, that it was adapted by every school of sacred science. This symbol is the circle, the emblem of unity, eternity, and the immutable law that governs all celestial and terrestrial things. The ancient sages, whose minds were illuminated by the light of the ages, did not regard the circle as a mere geometrical curiosity. To them, it was a glyph of cosmic order, the silent utterance of the first cause, a shadow cast by the infinite upon the finite. In its form, perfect and without beginning or end, they beheld the blueprint of the divine mind, the archetype from which all things proceeded and to which all things return. The circle, then, is more than a mark drawn upon the earth. It is a seal of the mysteries, the signet of the invisible hierarchies, and the sacred boundary that separates the profane from the sanctified. Eliphas Levi, inheritor of the ancient Hermetic flame, rightfully perceived the circle as both sanctuary and laboratory, wherein the Theurgist may perform the great work. For within its perimeter, the magician does not merely summon elemental spirits or direct invisible forces. He aligns himself with the celestial rhythms, invoking not merely names, but principles. These principles, eternal in nature, are reflected within the psychic constitution of man, and thus the circle becomes the crucible wherein the macrocosmic is distilled into the microcosmic. To the true initiate, the act of drawing the circle is a rite of invocation and consecration. The chalk upon the temple floor is not idle decoration. It is a line traced by the will, a spiritual compass attuned to the 4 elements and the 7 powers. Upon the circumference may be inscribed the sacred names, the planetary seals, the sigils of angelic orders, each a syllable in great language of light by which the higher intelligence communicates their truth to man. The Kabbalists speak of the Ein Sof, the boundless, as a primal circle of light from which all manifestation emerges, and within that limitless radiance they place the emanation of the tree of life, each a reflection of the one truth refracted through the prism of existence. When the adept steps into his circle, he symbolically returns to that primal state of unity, and through purification, discipline, and invocation seeks to reunite the scattered fragments of his soul. But let the student beware The circle magnifies. It is the lens through which the soul is examined by the eye of the invisible. It is the mirror of virtue or vice. If the heart is impure or the mind is clouded by selfish desire, the very forces summoned may become the agents of undoing. The circle is both protection and a test, a fortress for the wise and a trap for the unwise. The greatest of all circles, however, is not traced in dust or drawn in ink. It is the radiant circumference of the awakened consciousness, the sovereign mind that has achieved dominion over its lower nature. The true magus does not need to draw a circle, for he is the circle. He walks in the presence of the sacred at all times, for he has made his inner world a temple and his thoughts a liturgy. Thus, the circle remains the symbol of the eternal order. It is the sign of perfection and the path of return. In its center lies the still point, the unmoved mover, the words unspoken, and from that center, the initiate guided by wisdom, tempered by virtue, and illuminated by truth may rise as the phoenix from the ashes of the profane and take his place among the stars. So let's take a look at some examples of this circle dot. I think the place I want to start is with the bullseye symbol. We find this symbol not only in archery, but we find it with playing darts as well. The term bullseye, referring to the center of a target, which is likely originating from the practice of English archers, where they were shooting arrows through the eye sockets of bulls as a test of skill, with the term first recorded in 1833. So with this, there's some esotericism, obviously. We spoke a little bit about bull symbolism, and anybody who followed the cubbyhole, I spoke in great deal about the bull symbolism. So you can understand how this ancient tradition of rites and passage being used with the bull over time evolves. And as the implements evolve with the species, and our imagination for more brutal things start to evolve as well, this idea comes about within the practice of archery. But the bullseye is a very powerful symbol. It is a circled dot. In fact, it is multiple rings with a dot in the center. So the arrow, or specifically whatever projectile we are using, can represent many different aspects of our behaviors and consciousness. One aspect or one faculty which it can represent is will. Another thing it can represent is action itself. So the outer rings can represent the exoteric religions. And we spoke about what exoteric religions are, and we spoke about what the word exoteric actually means. It means the outer layer. It means what is commonly known, what is commonly visible. So the exoteric religions of the world, specifically the three major Abrahamic religions, which we're going to dive deeply into. So the exoteric stories of these religions are on these outer rings. And then you can correlate this to also the inner faculties of the human mind. And this can represent ignorance, the outer ring of ignorance. And it can also represent the dogma, right? So this is the blindly believed lies and the dogmatic traditions, which everybody just goes along with, right? For an example, one of the biggest dogmatic beliefs, false and erroneous beliefs, is the belief in man's authority, or that man is the lawmaker. As we penetrate through these rings, can represent the esoteric religions. So you're getting deeper into this, and you're finding out that these religions actually have a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of things there that pertain to astrotheology, a lot of things that pertain to the mystery schools, to the self. And in fact, it's actually a direct trace and a direct pathway back to our origins. And so, like I said before, we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because these are methods for preserving, which is currently almost all we have left, of preserving some of these ancient sciences. You can also correlate this to, in the esoteric sense, the stages of initiation, maybe breaking illusions and doing shadow work. You're actually starting to break through the barriers that are blockading you from finding your true purpose, your true meaning, your higher self. So you're trying to shoot this arrow with the focus, with accuracy, and hit this center point. At first, you really are bad at it, and you're just believing everything on the exoteric, the outer rim. You're very ignorant. You're believing in dogmatic, erroneous belief systems. And then as you get better, you start to hit these center rings a bit more, and you start to dive deeper into the esoteric traditions. And then eventually you get to the center. So this is the journey. And the center represents truth or gnosis and the self. So this is the truth underneath of all this stuff. It's the center point. So this is a really great example of the circle dot being used. And it's kind of interesting that we use this pretty consistently across the entire globe within games. I find that quite fascinating and quite profound because these games, these ancient games, actually have tremendous esoteric knowledge preserved within them, such as Ring Around the Rosie. That's another circle dot. So in archery, we have this concept called sin. In fact, professionally, you're not actually going to hear this term, but colloquially, people will use this term to refer to missing the mark. The proper term is hamartia, and this word literally means to miss the mark. So a lot of people use this concept of sin to mean missing the mark, but in literature, you'll find this used a lot more, specifically such as with Greek tragedies, although it also is used within Christian theology. So what this term really means is to depict the flaws or defects of a character and portraying these as the reason of the potential downfall. The character in a play is that which reveals the moral purpose of the agents, the sort of thing they seek or avoid. So one example of this would be Achilles. His character defect is his obsession with pride, with his ego, and it eventually leads to his death in the story, for those who know. And I was going to bring that up here a lot more deep, but people already know this story, so I didn't need to go too deep into that. But the idea that I'm trying to relay here is that the reason why we miss the mark, the reason why we sin, the reason why we have this hamartia, because of our own willful ignorance, because we choose to not do the work, do the due diligence that is required to hit that center mark, to hit the mark of truth. Most people will never understand this. They want it handed to them on a silver platter. That's not how it goes down. As an initiate, you have to engage yourself. You have to strengthen your skills to hit that center point. And it takes an eclectic amount of due diligence and work. It takes a plethora of information. It takes a plethora of experiences. And it really does it takes time. Honestly, it takes your two types of spiritual currency, time and attention. Speaking of time, one of the other most well-known circle dots is the analog clock. This analog clock is extremely esoteric. Not only is it a daily magic circle ritual that we are all performing and most of us living in harmony with, but also it becomes extremely devastating to the psychology of the individual based upon how it's being used, especially if we become egoly fixated and attached to this idea of the solar measurements of time. But I'm just going to break down a little bit of this. And in some future episodes, we're going to get into some more crucial aspects of the error in time in correlation with the ancient Egyptian hero myths. But for now, we're just going to look at the first level of this esotericism. So the big hand, also known as the hour hand, is the hand of Horus. This is where we get that word from as well. Hour, H-O-U-R, and Horus, H-O-R-U-S. S. So this hour hand measures the degrees from which Horus is visible and can be studied throughout its annual cycles and throughout its daily journey. In this phase of the solar tradition, Horus is correlated to the zootype of the golden falcon, or eventually the golden hawk as well. And this golden hawk is symbolic of the sun's movement throughout the day and year. It is a masculine component. It also represents action. And to give an example of that, when the sun rises above the horizon, it's time to get up and move and do and work. This also can correlate to the trivium process. I am going to be stating the trivium process in reverse here, so keep that in mind. So this part of the trivium is rhetoric or output, and it can be correlated to the material plane and the physical senses, or the physical plane of existence, the plane of effects. The lunar time, which is known as the minute hand, is correlated astrotheologically to the goddess Min, or Selene. And this word Min is extremely crucial because it's also connected to the word men, men. And in the future, we will be breaking down the anthropomorphization of elemental powers and the sciences and phenomenons of nature. But this goddess Min eventually becomes masculinized. So originally, the ancients venerated and respected the moon as its own celestial entity with its own luminescence. And then as we move forward and we become more solar in our operation, we find that the moon is just refracting the light from the sun. And so now the sacred feminine of men is being overlapped with the solar energy of the sun. And there's some more esoteric alchemical wedding that's taking place here with the attributes of the sun refracting its light off of the feminine, or the lunar. But we have this lunar phenomenon, which is a feminine aspect, and it relates to the emotions and the intuition. And we know this because not only scientifically do we know when there's a full moon, we have a phenomenon of the gravitational pull that also affects our hormone balances and our emotional and psychological balances. We also have the direct correlation to the biology of the female gender with the menstrual cycle. This represents in the trivium the logical or the processing. Now, a lot of people may get confused because we would think that logic is a masculine component, but we have to understand and stay oriented to the symbolism here. This also represents the spiritual or non-physical or even metaphysical. Now, the second hand is a very interesting aspect, and it has a crucial historical relevance as we move forward when we talk about the era and time. But the second hand is correlated to the Roman god Mercurius and the Greek god Hermes, and then the Egyptian god Thoth or Thought. It is a masculine component, and as I said, it represents thought. And then in the trivium process, it represents grammar or the input. And then in alchemy, it also represents quicksilver. Mercury is seen as the messenger of God and the rejuvenator of the energy here on planet Earth. But the point of me bringing this to the table is to recognize that this is a magic circle. Now, the reason why Mercury is vital is because Mercury actually is the closest planet to the sun, and it revolves the fastest around the sun. So we have a orientation issue here where the second hand is revolving around the center point, which represents the sun for Mercury or the second hand. But simultaneously, we have the hour hand that's rotating around that center point. And that center point actually represents the fixed source of the universe. So connecting this to this phenomenon of the second hand, we have to understand how we measure seconds, because the second hand originally was just fractions of the degrees of the sun's movement. But when the atomic age came about, we changed over to these atomic clocks. And for a more precise measurement of seconds, we started using the measurements of a cesium-133 atom. And this became the standard. This atom is extremely vital as well because our diagrams for an atom in general tend to be a circled dot. Okay, before we move on from this section, I want to bring up some important knowledge about this analog clock. The first thing is that this analog clock is technically part of the greater mysteries, not the more ancient or what would be deemed the lesser mysteries. These lesser mysteries are not, in fact, less valuable. In fact, they are more connected to pure form. So these greater mysteries are the idea of controlling elemental powers. So in fact, it is a form of magic. And we will be getting into the origins of magic eventually. But the point being here is that this is a complex form. So relate this back to when we're talking about pure forms. But we have to understand that this analog clock is based upon the Babylonian and Chaldeans and the Sumerians' ideas of these sexagesimal cycles. And this idea that our solar phenomenons are in degrees of 60 is not arbitrary. It's very important to the ancient evolution of the mythos. So this sexagesimal system is a base 60 mode of reckoning inherited from the Mesopotamia priest kings and their sages, and also the Babylonian mathematical calendars, which in fact they got from the Hebrews and the Greeks. Only few of the Greeks were actually initiated into the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, specifically Pythagoras. The Chaldeans also used this as a charting method, specifically for astrology and astrotheology. And it was divinized as a highly sacred number and sacred degree. So this perfect circle is divided, the symbol of eternity and wholeness, into 360 degrees, which this number itself is derived from the sacred 60, which is 6 times 60, which equals 360. So each hour, a circle within the circle was split into 60 minutes, each minute into 60 seconds. And these cycles did not merely track time, they mirrored a phenomenon of the celestial motions. And this was an attempt to understand the precession of the equinoxes and the orbit of the stars and the rhythms that were being witnessed at this time period. But unfortunately, it also obscures the original timekeeping methodology, which was about the Great Year, and we will be talking about that in the next episode. So to the initiates of the mystery schools, time was not a linear concept. It was a circular concept, or a spiral ladder upon which the soul ascends and descends through the labyrinths and mazes of incarnation. So the number 60 then may be seen as a glyph of universal order and mathematical emanations from the great architect's mind. Even today, as I pointed out in the first episode when we talked about rituals, when one is timekeeping or time managing, and we are thinking of the 60 units, right? The 60-degree units, we are, some of us knowingly, but most of us unknowingly, participating in an ancient rite of timekeeping. This number of 60 is also very vital for the angles and degrees of geometry, which I demonstrated in the Platonic solids section. And if you go back to that, you'll see what I'm talking about. Where do we find magical circles elsewhere? Well, we have vinyl records, right? Vinyl records are magical circles. And what do? We create magic with it, right? The music is magic. The dancing is magic. The connections, the experiences are magic. We have things like gears In machinery, those are magic circles. We have hard drives, which have magnetic disc in them, specifically the old school hard drives that, we read and write data onto. We have lenses, right? Lenses which help us to get different perspectives of reality, wide views, narrow views, wide angles, right? And to zoom in and zoom out, right? To either make clear or to make more blurry or less clear, and pretty much just to get different perspectives of reality. We have lenses, and we have these lenses here in our eyes, and our third eye has a lens as well. And then what do we use lenses on, right? We use them on things like cameras. And I think one of the most profound magic circles that we have is actually when it comes to film. And I mean, think about it. You have the old school reels, which is a magic circle. You have the lens in it, right? It's a magic circle. You have the gears, which are magic circles. And then what does it do? It creates this amazing projection. These magic circles are all around us in the things that we create. In fact, right now I'm staring at a camera, at a lens, right? And it is literally the circle dot, the magic circle. So we find this in film, like I was saying. There's great movies out there to watch to really delve into and pull out this amazing, rich understanding of the magic circle. I think Doctor Strange utilizes the magic circle in a tremendous, advanced way. I think movies like Suspiria by Dario Argento is also an amazing depiction of the magic circle. And one of my favorite movies, it's called The Devil Rides Out. In America, it was called The Devil's Bride. It has Christopher Lee in it, and it is one of the most profound occult films out there, up there with The Holy Mountain. And maybe we'll explain that one day. But at the end of the movie, they use a magic circle, and they use it correctly. That movie has a lot of knowledge about ancient rites and rituals and the occult. So I highly recommend those movies for people if you want to study some magic circles. There are plenty out there, including movies that are called The Magic Circle. One of the most profound movies as well, which has the magic circle in it, is Eyes Wide Shut. You find the magic circle not only within the clandestine secret society, which Kubrick was very, very aware of, and we're not going to get into all that here, but the main point is to understand that the magic circle takes place at the mansion, and there's circles throughout the entire movie. The whole movie itself is a circle, and then eventually at the end, you will see the daughter in the store shopping with Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, and there is a game called The Magic Circle, which is all in red, which has a lot of ubiquity with what has taken place throughout the movie earlier on. And there's some deep symbolism in that. I'm not going to break all that down here, but for those who are interested, you can go to Rob Ager. He's a great film expert, and he breaks all this down. He breaks down all the dark occult connections and the, psychopathic things that are taking place that Kubrick was trying to bring to the table. So moving on, where else do we find magic circles? Well, we find magic circles in nature. I think this is the most beautiful. We find magic circles within things like fruit, right? The cells, we find them within rocks, okay? There's literally rocks with perfect circles in them. We find them with all kinds of fruits and vegetables and things like this, specifically onions, oranges, apples, there's all kinds of stuff. But those circles are important. It's a fractal, sacred geometrical manifestation of a creative force. We find them in the planets. We find them in the rings of trees, which is extremely vital for the study of the age and what has taken place throughout the ages of really old trees. But it's a circle dot. We find those rings. Very, very important. These are magic circles. We find it with water drops. Whenever you drop a water into a still, glass of water or any kind of still water, you're going to find these rings, these magic circles vibrating outward. And in fact, you can get those with cymatics, with frequency. We find them with the eye, the magic circle of the eye. And that's one of the most profound and most intimate for us because it's directly connected to our anatomy. And it helps to what? See. It helps us to make clear of the world that we are experiencing. But just because, let's say, you're blind, doesn't mean that your magic circles are not there either. There are other types of magic circles, such as the pineal gland, right? We find them in storms. We find them within hurricanes and within tornadoes. And then we find them with something that is extremely important, which is the psychedelics or entheogenic compounds. So on the screen here, I have the Amanita muscaria. So whenever you look at mushrooms, and this is just mushrooms in general, not just the psychedelic ones, but the ones I'm trying to make an emphasis on are the entheogenic ones, that when you look at it from a bird's eye view, it is a magic circle, and usually it's a circle dot. And then one of the most important ones, which is the northern circumpolar constellations. And we will be discussing what is known as the Great Year, and it is the 25 to 28,000 year cycle that takes place around the northern pole star, with Ursa Minor and Ursa Major, though Ursa Major does dip below the horizon. Ursa Minor does not dip below the horizon. So it's very important to understand it. And you can look at time lapses from different parts of the planet and see this magic circle, and the ancients mapped this out. And this is extremely profound, and it will give you a wider perspective of your true origins. And if you want to know more about that, I just recommend going to the cubbyhole and diving deep into that, because not only have I, but also Nate and Doug have clearly stated the importance of this in the cubbyhole. So as an example of circle dot symbolism, let's go to the Ghanas, specifically Ghana of West Africa, and check out their models for their sign language. One of these models is their symbolism, which is called Adinkra, which is a visual symbol that represents concepts, proverbs, and aphorisms, which are expressions of principles. They originated from the Yaman, or the Gaman, people of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. Back then, they were featured as prints on clothing, which royals wore or the high priest would wear, and they were used as implements in different ceremonies, but they were also drawn, they were hieroglyphics, and more modernly, like I stated, they were used as expressions of different categories for different social statuses, and also to express aphorisms, obviously. So the Adinkra Hanin was considered to be the king of the Adinkra symbols, which was a symbol for authority, leadership, and charisma. And it gets directly associated to this idea of kingship. Now, this is extremely vital because we have to understand that this symbol, which was originally venerating an elemental power, has now moved into the phase where anthropomorphication is taking place. This symbol is an example of that, just not visually. It is an example of that through its modality of expression, being that it gets associated to this idea of authority vested in men. So it is a claim to the Most High, where originally it would be divinized as the one great spirit. Now it has moved into the social dynamics for man to claim authority. And we're going to see how this kind of dogma actually is some of the roots of the issues that we are facing today that leads us into these corrupted forms, and also the complex forms which are misunderstood. And also it is a method to keep the chains set upon the psyche of individuals. And it's also a failure within the priest class to preserve the ancient methodologies of the more pure forms and what they actually stood for, and pretty much man just getting too big for his britches and trying to become the arbitrator of law. So moving on to spirals. Well, I don't think there's a better example of spiral symbolism than to look directly at sacred geometry. So if we look at the Fibonacci sequence or the golden sequence, the golden ratio, it goes 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. Each number is the sum of the two before it. Now, if you take this sequence and build squares out of these values, a spiral emerges, a shape found everywhere in nature. Remember that. If you take this sequence and build squares out of those values, a spiral emerges, a shape found everywhere in nature. Literally everywhere when you look around, right? The symbols that I was showing you earlier, you will find not only the circle dot, but you'll find this Fibonacci sequence throughout it. You're going to find it in plants, you're going to find it in seashells, you're going to find it in the galaxies, the Milky Way, you're going to find it in storms, you're going to find it in flowers. You're going to find this everywhere. And anybody who has studied anything spiritual or anything about nature usually comes across the golden ratio at some level. In fact, the golden ratio is so profoundly evident everywhere in your entire life. I don't know how you could miss it. It's just that we're not taught what it is without going down that path. At Bruna-Banye, a significant center of human activity for almost 6,000 years, which it actually goes way further back than that, the spiral symbol is a dominant feature. The site is complex of Neolithic mounds, chambers, tombs, standing stone, hedges, and other prehistoric enclosures. The major site with Bruna-Banye are the impressive passages, graves of Newgrange, Noth, and Doth, each standing on the ridge within the river Bin. Each of these three megalith sites have significant archaeoastronomical significance. It is thought that Newgrange and Douth have winter solstice and solar alignments, and Noth has an equinox solar alignment. So it's extremely important. So these are ancient mounds which are technically coming directly out of the stellar people. And we will get into that for those that is a more advanced understanding with the three ancient cults and the three main cults, which is the solar, lunar, and stellar. And these stellar people came directly out of the Nile. I'm not going to explain all that here, but point being that this is evidence not only of that migration and these caravans that migrated out of the Nile, but the main thing is to understand that the symbolism of the spirals is all over this place. It is amazing, okay? These mound builders were very advanced with their astronomy, with their spirituality, with their understanding of natural law, with their understanding of agriculture, and just so much stuff, just an amazing amount of beautiful things. But the main point for bringing this here is to show you examples of the spiral being used thousands and thousands of years ago. Noth is the largest of all passage graves situated within Bruna-Banye complex. The site consists of one large mound and 17 smaller satellite tombs. The large mound is roughly 12 meters in height and 70 meters in diameter. It contains two passages placed along the east-west line, and that's very important because that deals with the annual cycles of the sun. The passages are independent of each other and lead to ceremonial chambers. The mound is encircled by 127 curbstones, okay? It is encircled by these curbstones, which is profoundly amazing. And so it's a circle dot. There's a circle dot there. Chambers, tombs, mounds, it's all circle dot, okay? And then you have spirals, the journey of the spirit, okay? We also have in the Libico Berber scripts the spiral. So we find this in cave paintings all over the place, specifically with zoo types. And as you can see here, either a lion or wolf you have the spiral tail on this. And in fact, there's a circle dot there too. So you start to see, and as you start to unravel this, you're going to find spirals everywhere. Okay. You're going to find them in mazes. You're going to find them within blueprints of the mind. You're going to find them within scans of not only the planet, but you're going to find them within scans of the body. Another example of spirals is it's a pretty interesting example. There's this game, the game of the snake, the serpent game, or Maheen, is thought to be a board game played by the ancients, specifically the ancient Egyptians, during at least the 1st to 6th dynasty, which is one of the oldest known board games to man, although it is not certain that it was a playable activity at that time period. Most likely it was more significant for spiritual and ceremonial purposes. As I said earlier, we're going to find these games and they're preserving this knowledge. We're going to see this a lot throughout history. The general form of the board used for Maheen is a segmented spiral track based on a snake form, which the head is at the center. The game was often or always played with marbles with a relatively large recumbent lion and a lioness piece. And some even speculate that it was actually a jackal at one point as well. But as you can see here, this is the journey, the snake way, the snake pathway. Anybody who knows Dragon Ball Z will know the snake way reference, but it is the curvy path, right? But they have it in a coil, right? Because snakes coil up as a spiral. We find that in nature as well. A coiled snake is a spiral, but it's a circle dot. We need to take a look at another form of a spiral and another form of the symbolism, which I felt was crucial, and that is maze symbolism and labyrinth symbolism. So I'm giving some examples on the screen here. You have the Hollywood Stone in Ireland, yet again, the labyrinth and maze symbolism, which is also very spiral-like. And it's important to understand, we're about to dive pretty deep into understanding the difference between a labyrinth and a maze and why these two things have two different allegories to them. And I hope to reveal something that most people have never even conceived of when it comes to this symbolism. But what I'm trying to show here, first of all, is that these symbols are used all over the place. You find them in East Afghanistan. You find them in the United States with the Native Americans. You find them, you find them in India. You find them in Egypt. You find them in Greece. Okay, and obviously the mind has been correlated to this maze journey. You find it in movies. You find it in temples. So this symbol is extremely, extremely powerful. So what's the difference between a maze and a labyrinth? Typical labyrinths wind back and forth from the outside to the center and then back out again, usually following a single path. There are twists and turns, but no choices. You simply keep walking forward. Okay, so a labyrinth has no choices within it. Labyrinths have two popular frameworks: the Cretan or classical style, the four-axis medieval, and the four-axis medieval design. So the four-axis design was created during the Middle Ages and was popularized in the cathedral floors of northern France, such as Notre Dame, right? Which is probably one of the most famous examples. And this has the four-axis labyrinth design within its framework. And quite interesting, they just rebuilt that, a few years ago, actually. And you can find like replicas of this in Massachusetts and San Francisco. So a lot of people conflate mazes and labyrinths as the same thing when they're not. So as I stated before, a labyrinth is a windy pathway with no choices. That's the most simple way of looking at it. Throughout the ages, the term labyrinth and maze have been spoken of as they were one and the same. Yet to the discerning initiate, these two structures symbolize profoundly different states of consciousness and allegories and functions. The labyrinth is a sacred design, universal in its path. It offers no choices, no false turns. It is singular It is a singular winding journey inward and outward, symbolic of the soul's progression towards illumination. The labyrinth cannot lead one astray, for it is not a puzzle, but a pilgrimage. It guides the aspirant gently, but inevitably towards the center. So towards the center, the axis of truth, and then returns him transformed to the world. Thus, the labyrinth is the path of the occultist who understands the requirements and natural law, the pathway that leads to true fulfillment. Now let's look at a maze. The maze, by contrast, is a manifestation of confusion, multicursal in nature. It presents the traveler with choices, deceptions, and dead ends. To the uninitiated, the maze appears as a cruel invention, a prison of false paths and choices, false dialects. Yet, to the occultist, it is a sacred crucible, carefully designed not to defeat the seeker, but to refine him. It is a ritual of discernment. Unlike the smooth singular pathway of labyrinths, the maze requires choices, judgments, discernments, and courage, perseverance. It teaches through trial. It offers no easy answer, for it is not a road, but a mirror, reflecting the condition of the soul that walks it. Each dead end is not a failure, but a revelation, the unveiling of a falsehood, the stripping away of illusions. Each mistaken turn tempers the will, hones the intuition, and draws the traveler inward towards the still point of self-knowledge. In this way, the maze becomes the living oracle, whispering that truth is not handed, it must be earned. Now, these are two diametrically opposed allegories of understanding the spiritual journey and understanding the nature of reality. In fact, in future shows, we're going to talk about the left-hand and the right-hand path and the middle path. And these connect to that, okay? So the labyrinth reveals the path. The maze reveals the seeker. The labyrinth shows us what is eternal. The maze teaches us what is not. One leads to union. The other prepares us for it. Thus, the maze is not the enemy of the initiate. It is the shadow guardian of the temple. Only those with clarity of heart, mind, and will, and consistency of vision may pass through its shifting walls and emerge with the light intact. So this is very, very crucial to understand when it comes to the spiritual journey, the spiral ritual, because the mind is a maze. It's not a labyrinth. Okay, it is a maze, the maze of the mind. We always hear it, the maze of the mind. We don't talk about the mind as a labyrinth, okay? But the labyrinth is also used throughout many different cultures because ultimately, at the same time, it is true. Ultimately, at the end, the choice is, you're going to get back to source, right? So when you die, you're going back to source. That's it, and you came from source. So you go outward and then back inward and outward and inward, as above, so below, as without, so within, etc. So there's two different examples of this. There's round labyrinths, usually, which are more circle, dot, and spiral. And then you have square mazes. These are these two prime forms, right? You have these square mazes, these corn mazes, right? Very important to understand this. These are archetypal symbols and allegorical in their nature, revealing the process from which we must extrapolate our own experience and gain true insight into ourselves and into the workings of the cosmic order and the cosmic laws, natural law. We find these things throughout all history. In Crete, beneath the palace of King Minos, there was constructed a labyrinth, right? Here's that word, labyrinth, a vast and winding structure created by the master artificer Daedalus. It was no mere architectural curiosity. It was a chthonic temple, a sacred prison housing a monstrous minotaur, a being half man, half bull. And that symbolism, that anthropomorphication of this zoo type is extremely important, and we will be looking at that in future episodes as well. But for now, we're just talking about the labyrinth here. A symbol of the beast within man. Theseus, the hero, but more truly the seeker, he is the one who dares descend into the inner chaos to face the beast of his own lower nature. Theseus is not merely slaying a monster. He is undergoing the alchemical confrontation with the prima materia, the ego, the shadow, the unrefined elements of the self, but he cannot navigate this trial alone. He receives help from Ariadne, the daughter of Minos, who gives him a thread, the golden cord of initiation, wisdom, and divine remembrance. The etymology of the word clue is tied, as it were, to the story of the Minotaur. A clue, C-L-E-W, was a ball of thread, like the one that Ariadne gave to Theseus to help him find his way in the labyrinth of the Minotaur. Over time, the spelling and the meaning changed to C-L-U-E we use today, like the clue Ariadne gave to Theseus. This thread is the ray of spirit, the inner guidance that allows the seeker to return from the abyss with illumination. This thread, this string, is super important. It is found in Freemasonry. It is found all over the place. But this journey, it's speculated because in different versions of the story, it seems to be more of a maze rather than a labyrinth. But, you know, we could get caught up in the semantics of that all we wanted. But the importance of this is to understand the allegory of this, which represents the inner self. And there's a lot of esoteric importance when it comes to the evolution of the mythos. But again, that's for later. We'll get to that. The mental maze is not designed to confuse the unworthy, but to awaken the worthy, those who dare to seek the treasure of self-mastery. Within its spirals lies the ancient path, coiled like a serpent of Kundalini, guarded by the beast of the appetite, the dragon or serpent, and crowned by the sword of the awakened will. For he who descends in courage and returns with wisdom is no longer a child of ignorance, but a magician made whole. So we find this maze symbolism in many, many movies. In fact, if we look to two of probably the most relevant movies, The Shining by Stanley Kubrick, we find the maze, and then obviously we all know what happens in that, and it's extremely allegory, including the fact that the hotel itself is actually a maze. And people can look into that if they like. Again, I'd say Rob Ager would be a good person to look into for that one. But yes, the hotel itself is designed specifically as a maze. Kubrick would even change the sets before the actors got there, and they would be confused when they came on set because the entire maze does not logically pan out. People have blueprints of this, and then they've also constructed it through three-dimensional programs to show that none of it actually makes any sense whatsoever, which gives the spatial uneasiness when we're actually watching the movie because our brains are processing the data and we think it's supposed to be this, and then it ends up being something completely different, such as when we turn right down this hallway, it's actually should be a different area when in fact it's another hallway or a room, etc. But another one is Labyrinth, obviously, with David Bowie. And that is a great movie. Both of these movies are extremely great allegories, and I love the labyrinth part of this, though it seems to be more maze-like than an actual labyrinth, though. But the ultimate thing is that they're both leading you, through the same thing. There's a journey, there's trials, there's errors, and you end up returning to source, right? So the Labyrinth movie, you start out and you're going on the search for innocence, right? The baby, and she has to bring the innocence back, from the dark magician or the dark occultist. Now, something my girlfriend turned me on to is this anime and manga called Uzumaki. Now, I wanted to bring forward the dangers of spirals. And I think this is very crucial to understand when we're starting to go down this path. So I need to give people this knowledge specifically. Otherwise, they can end up in very, very bad places. And I think that Uzumaki is a great allegory of these negative consequences without having the proper tools and without having mastery, without having discipline. Now, this was written by Junji Ito, and it is extremely profound, absolutely profound. I highly recommend it for anybody, honestly. So in this anime, we have this profound awakening that takes place in this town. And it's not a god, it's not a ghost, but it's simply a pattern. It's a spiral. And at first, it seems very innocent, even beautiful to a lot of people, but soon it is seen everywhere. In the wind, in the snail, in the human ear, in the turning of thoughts. It infects the flesh, distorts space, consumes time. It is not merely a symbol, it is a law. The spiral draws inward, always inward. In this, it is a sacred symbol of descent, the mind falling into fixation, the ego tightening around a single inescapable idea. There you go. There's a negative aspect of the spiral symbolism, this fixation on a single thing, right? Never seeing the wholeness of everything. Each character in Uzumaki succumbs to a personal form of obsession, of psychic gravity, you could even say. The father becomes obsessed with the spiral pottery. So he's a pottery maker and he becomes obsessed with the spiral pottery until he merges with the kiln. So he actually becomes the kiln. It's profoundly insane, and the anime is amazing. It's black and white. It's just, the art style is done amazingly. It has a great allegory in it. The mother who fears the spiral so deeply, she mutilates herself to escape them. So this is the opposite side. It's the same thing though. She's so fixated on this fear, so she goes to the extent of mutilating herself. Lovers so bound together, they spiral into a coiled death, right? So they literally do the Kundalini dance, but they twist so much, to death. They literally become this monster and then die. These are not random horrors. They are archetypes of psychological collapse. In this, the spiral is the path of unchecked inwardness, of ego turned inward upon itself, creating a black hole that consumes all that is good. This is the negative aspect of it. Of course, there's a positive aspect of it because, like we were talking about through the entire episode, this is the spiritual journey. I always have the motif of you must learn to surf the chaos. But if you can't surf, then don't tread the waters, okay? Don't try to do it yet. You need to have balance to be able to handle these things. So negative correlations to the spiral, we have these terms that actually psychologically and behaviorally represent what can happen with an out of control obsession or a spiral, right? So we have twisted, someone who's twisted, someone who's immoral, someone who will do gruesome things, just the unthinkable things to other people or even to themselves. You have wound up, right? So you're so tight and you're wound up. You have entwined. You have tangled. Both of these are tangled, right? Then you have knotted. These are all forms of that same spiral, which is spiraling out of control, right? And then you have snared, to be caught, right? And then we all know this one. You have spun. You get stuck in that spiral and you get spun, right? You get spun out of control, And what I mean by out of control is out of self-discipline and self-control. Usually we use the term spun to represent those who have spun themselves out through drug addiction. And it's important to understand these negative aspects of this symbolism so that we can be prepared to deal with it whenever it comes about. So again, to get spun, to get snared, to get entangled, to get knotted, to get entwined, to be wound up, to be twisted, right? All of these things come from these negative aspects of our psychology, from us not doing our own shadow work. And it's important to make sure to persevere within self-knowledge and self-discipline and self-mastery so that we don't end up receiving the negative consequences or doing things that would create negative consequences for others because of this. And as a final statement here, the wise do not curse the storm, for they know it is the great initiator. It whips away the veil of comfort, revealing the sacred center. The storm does not seek to destroy the soul. It seeks to strip it bare so that it may find what was always untouched. In the eye, one is reborn, for in the center, the mind is clear and unified. And thus, we have the eye of the storm, which is where stillness takes place, metaphorically. And the allegory of that is to find your center, to find your balance. And with that being said, folks, I hope that you gain great knowledge from this, and I'm really excited to continue to put more work out there. I know sometimes I have these long absences of where I'm not putting out a lot of work and I'm not communicating, but as I stated, I have a newborn in the house, and getting used to that, and it's really awesome, and it's really a blessing to have a new freedom fighter amongst the family. And I'm also really excited to get back into doing a lot of this work. I have a bunch of ideas and new future projects coming out, but my main thing is to focus on this series and continue to put out more quality content about the occult. But that is one of my expertise, and that is where I thrive the most. And the next episode will be episode 3. We're moving into astrotheology, and this is going to be called The Hero's Journey. I'm going to do the best I can to get that out to you as soon as possible. And with that being said, farewell, fellow spiritual beings of this world and noble ones.